Millionaire laughed at pregnant wife's pleas. Mistress destroyed him in the end. Imagine waking up one morning to find that everything you believed about your marriage was built on shaky ground. Picture a mansion full of secrets, a lavish life overshadowed by lies, and a pregnant wife pleading for compassion only to be laughed at by the very man who once promised to protect her. This is the story of Andrew Blackwood, an arrogant millionaire consumed by greed and pride, whose heartless betrayal of his devoted wife seemed unstoppable, but fate had other plans. When a cunning mistress arrived on the scene, both the devoted wife and the calculating lover became unwitting instruments of karma unleashing, a spectacular downfall nobody could have anticipated. Andrew Blackwood was not always a ruthless millionaire, nor was his life written in the stars from birth. He grew up in a modest home on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio, raised by parents who worked tirelessly to make ends meet. His father, a small-time accountant, had big dreams for Andrew, fantasizing that his boy would one day shake hands with global CEOs and dine among society's elite. His mother, a kind-hearted nurse, taught Andrew the importance of empathy and humility. In the early days, he lived by those values. But fate is unpredictable, and sometimes the very virtues nurtured in childhood are the first to vanish under the spotlight of success. At 19, Andrew worked part-time at a local diner, flipping pancakes for morning regulars, while simultaneously juggling classes at the community college. He had hustle and grit, the kind that made people notice him. Though money was tight, Andrew rarely complained. He studied business administration and spent nights devouring any biography he could get his hands on, from Warren Buffett's journey to Bill Gates's philanthropic ventures. He was particularly fascinated by Microsoft's early struggles, marveling at how an ambitious college dropout built one of the world's most recognizable tech giants from a humble garage. Andrew read about each step, each failure, and each pivot that led to the behemoth brand. He dreamed of forging his own empire. During his sophomore year, Andrew met Jessica Monroe. She was a psychology major, with dreams of helping trauma survivors recover from emotional scars. She was the light that brightened Andrew's life, the soft-spoken, empathetic soul who saw beyond his ambition to the gentle heart beating beneath. They met at a campus fundraiser dedicated to mental health awareness. Jessica had volunteered to work at the event, and Andrew was there because he'd been promised extra credit by his marketing professor. They ended up side by side at a table, handing out pamphlets and collecting donations. Their connection was almost immediate. Andrew made a silly joke about how the event sponsors clearly didn't know Marketing 101, and Jessica laughed, a gentle laugh that made him forget the entire world for a moment. Their courtship was simple and sweet at first. From late-night coffee runs to weekend study dates, they quickly realized they completed each other in subtle ways. Jessica encouraged Andrew to slow down whenever his big dreams felt overwhelming, while Andrew cheered Jessica on when she worried she wouldn't make an impact in a sometimes callous world. Together, they navigated final exams, financial burdens, and family expectations. 4 years later, they graduated. Soon after, Andrew proposed with a modest ring he purchased using his savings from the diner. Jessica burst into tears of joy, saying it was perfect because it represented his honest effort and genuine love. After a small wedding in Jessica's parents' backyard, they moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment downtown. There was hardly space to walk between the bed and the closet, but they were happy. Jessica landed a job as a counselor at a local non-profit that helped at-risk youths and domestic abuse survivors. Andrew was determined to climb the corporate ladder at a marketing firm he'd just joined. Little did they know how quickly life could change. Within a few years, Andrew's quick wit, ability to read market trends, and relentless determination caught the attention of the firm's CEO. Promotions began rolling in, along with bonuses that dwarfed their previous income. Andrew found himself on private jets to attend conferences in New York, London, and Tokyo, sometimes returning home with the hazy glow of success in his eyes, but also with a hunger that could not be satisfied. By the time Andrew turned 30, he no longer worked for anyone else. He had ventured out on his own, building an agency that specialized in marketing for tech startups. Jessica was proud but a bit wary. She recognized the flicker in Andrew's eyes, a flicker that spoke of wanting more and more, almost an insatiable thirst for power. Yet, she stood by him. After all, she loved him dearly, and what could be wrong with supporting her husband's success? Andrew's agency soared. Strategic partnerships with venture capitalists and a daring approach to brand development put him at the forefront of young marketing moguls. When he turned around 33, he was already a millionaire with a plush home, luxury cars, and invitations to high-profile social events. On the surface, it was a fairy tale come true. However, behind the gilded doors, Andrew and Jessica's relationship began to show cracks. His travel schedule grew insane, and nights once spent quietly chatting with Jessica turned into high-end parties with new business contacts. Their dinner discussions, which had once centered on shared future goals or stories about the kids, Jessica counseled, now revolved around Andrew's deals, potential acquisitions, and which new toy he planned to buy next. One night, Jessica confided to Andrew that she missed their Simple Moments ice cream runs at midnight, heartfelt conversations about life's deeper meaning. Andrew laughed, but not in the gentle way he used to. This laughter was dismissive, almost condescending, as though he was shaking off a quaint memory from a life he had outgrown. Jessica felt a pang in her chest, but she told herself it was just stress. In time, she believed, once his business stabilized, everything would return to normal. Unfortunately, time would soon reveal that sometimes success can devour the very soul of a person. Andrew may have begun as a bright-eyed dreamer, but he was about to become unrecognizable even to himself. Andrew's rise to the millionaire status seemed too fast and too smooth to some. Colleagues whispered that no one scaled the heights of the marketing world that quickly without stepping on a few toes. Rumors circulated about Andrew pulling deals out from under former associates, leveraging insider information, and cutting backroom deals that danced precariously close to ethical lines. However, no allegations stuck because Andrew was a genius at covering his tracks. He had an almost supernatural ability to read people, figure out their insecurities, and give them what they needed until they were no longer useful. Jessica, for her part, tried to ignore the rumors. She still held on to the Andrew she knew in college, the man who'd worked hard at the diner, the one who had run to the corner store late at night for orange juice when she caught a nasty cold. She spent her days at the non-profit, increasingly busy helping clients in crisis. More and more, she stayed late at her office just to avoid coming home to an empty house. Andrew was never there. Their mansion, with its marble floors and sleek lines, felt stark and emotionless. She found herself missing the cramped charm of their old apartment, where love and closeness were tangible in every corner. But Andrew was too swept up in his own narrative to notice Jessica's growing loneliness. He was invited to appear on talk shows, business podcasts, and to speak at corporate summits. His face appeared on the cover of entrepreneurial magazines. He hosted lavish parties reminiscent of Gatsby's soirees with crystal chandeliers, caviar canapes, and champagne that flowed like water. Every time Jessica walked among those impeccably dressed attendees, she felt like a stranger in her own home. Andrew would introduce her to his latest potential partner or investor with a polite smile, then drift off into the crowd the moment something more exciting caught his eye. As Andrew's fame grew, so did his arrogance. He began to see himself as untouchable. The philanthropic values his mother had instilled vanished behind a thirst for more influence and wealth. Jessica noticed how he joked about lesser mortals who couldn't keep up with his pace. He no longer saw people as individuals, but as stepping stones or obstacles to his ambitions. It pained Jessica, but her pleas and gentle reminders only led to arguments. Andrew considered any mention of humility or caution to be an attack on his success. Their marriage was strained, but neither of them realized how close the foundation was to crumbling. It would take one life-changing event to nudge it over the edge: Jessica's pregnancy. A year after Andrew's business took off, Jessica discovered she was pregnant. She was elated, certain that the good news would bring them closer. She imagined telling Andrew over a romantic dinner, planning how they'd decorate a nursery, and perhaps scaling back their busy lifestyles to embrace a slower, more intimate journey toward parenthood. However, the reality was far different. When Jessica told Andrew she was expecting, they were in the middle of a fundraiser gala at the Four Seasons Hotel, a real place in the heart of Chicago, where Andrew had just inked a deal with an important foreign investor. The night was buzzing with conversation, clinking glasses, and Andrew's triumphant grin. Jessica pulled him aside discreetly, took a deep breath, and whispered the news in his ear. She expected tears of happiness, or at least a moment of stunned silence, something that signified a heartfelt connection. Instead, Andrew's face froze in a stilted smile. Quickly glancing around to ensure no one overheard, he simply said, "Now's not the time to talk about that, Jessica," and patted her hand as though she were a child. Then, with the facade of a gracious host, he turned and rejoined his guests, leaving Jessica alone by a towering floral arrangement. That night, she rode home alone while Andrew continued partying into the early hours. He finally dragged himself in at dawn, reeking of whiskey and cigars. Jessica, unable to sleep, stood in the kitchen waiting to confront him, but Andrew brushed off her concerns. "You can't drop news like that in front of everyone," he scolded. "We need to plan how to incorporate a baby into my schedule, especially now when everything's about to explode business-wise. Couldn't you have chosen a better moment?" Jessica stared at him in disbelief, her eyes brimming with tears. This was not the reaction she had dreamed of. Where was the man who once held her and told her he wanted a family? She tried to explain that she'd simply wanted to share the joy, but Andrew turned cold, muttering something about how she needed to get with the program and understand that his career was of utmost importance right now. That night, Jessica cried herself to sleep for the first time in years. Yet, as the weeks went on, Andrew seemed to make a superficial effort. He accompanied Jessica to a single doctor's appointment and purchased a luxury baby bassinet, the most expensive model on the market, just to show how much he cared. Jessica tried to remain hopeful, but something about Andrew's demeanor made her uneasy. Instead of genuine excitement, everything he did felt like a checklist item for appearance's sake, as though fatherhood was just another milestone he had to achieve for the perfect public image. She also noticed him pulling away physically and emotionally. He stayed out later than ever, scheduling business dinners and private meetings that left Jessica alone in the big house most nights. When she tried to share her fears about the pregnancy, her morning sickness, her fatigue, and her anxiety, Andrew would roll his eyes, telling her she needed to toughen up. "I'm under a lot of stress, too," he'd say. "You think being a millionaire is easy? If you can't handle a pregnancy, how will you handle motherhood?" Those words stung. Yet Jessica endured, determined to keep the peace in hopes that Andrew would come around. After all, she believed in the sanctity of marriage, in the vows they had shared in her parents' backyard. She told herself he was merely distracted, that the child growing inside her might soften him once it was born. But fate had other plans. Someone else was about to enter Andrew's life, someone who would feed his ego and ignite his darkest impulses, someone who would exploit his arrogance for her own twisted ends. And in doing so, she would unwittingly become the instrument of his ultimate downfall. Selina Davenport was a sight to behold. Tall, elegant, and meticulously groomed, she had a face that commanded attention in any room. She strutted into Andrew's office one afternoon like she owned the place, wearing a figure-hugging dress and brandishing an impressive resume tailored for one purpose: to catch Andrew's eye. Her role was that of a new financial consultant for a partnership Andrew's firm was considering. But there was something more in her confident smirk and her piercing gaze that suggested she wasn't just there for business. From the moment Andrew laid eyes on her, he was mesmerized. It wasn't just her physical appeal. Selina exuded ambition and cunning that echoed his own. During their first meeting, while reviewing spreadsheets, she made a sly comment about Andrew's no-nonsense approach. There was a light in her eyes that mirrored Andrew's hunger for power and wealth. In Selina, Andrew found a reflection of the person he had become, unapologetically driven and willing to do whatever it took to get ahead. The attraction was immediate, though they both conducted themselves with professional restraint at first. Their business relationship blossomed, each impressed by the other's calculations and deals. Selina, noticing Andrew's reaction to her, cleverly inserted compliments about his achievements, fueling his ego. Soon, they began exchanging text messages after work hours. What started as harmless banter about market trends and entrepreneurial ideas turned into personal questions, bits and pieces of their private lives. Andrew found himself confiding in Selina about the burden of his wife's pregnancy, complaining about Jessica's nagging and her lack of understanding for his business obligations. Selina played the role of confidant to perfection. She sympathized, even commiserated with Andrew's portrayal of Jessica as an obstacle to his grand ambitions. She told him that having a pregnant wife at this crucial juncture in his career was indeed bad timing. Andrew drank in her every word, relieved to find someone who validated his frustrations rather than questioned them. The line between professional and personal blurred with astonishing speed. Before long, Andrew found excuses to meet Selina outside the office, inviting her for late-night dinners under the guise of urgent business discussions. Jessica, growing more pregnant and more anxious by the day, suspected something was off. Andrew became colder, more distant, and even quicker to anger if she so much as asked about his whereabouts. She tried to bring him back into the fold, reminding him of the baby's upcoming gender reveal appointment, but he brushed her off with insulting remarks. "I've got a multi-million-dollar deal on the line. You can handle the doctor's visit alone." All the while, Selina was meticulously reeling Andrew into her web. She recognized that he was at a point in his life where he would do anything to maintain his success and power. Gradually, she planted seeds of discord about how fatherhood could ruin a man's freedom, about how Jessica was holding him back, about how he deserved a partner as ambitious as himself. The more Andrew listened, the more he was convinced that Selina understood him better than Jessica ever could. Within weeks, Andrew and Selina had progressed from quiet flirtation to a full-blown affair. Lavish hotel suites, secret weekend getaways, and expensive jewelry were all part of Andrew's attempts to keep Selina happy and close. Jessica, now well into her second trimester, became a bystander in her own marriage, reduced to scheduling her prenatal appointments by herself. But the real tragedy was Jessica's emotional turmoil. Her pleas for attention, Her desire to share her joys and fears about motherhood were met with ridicule and indifference. One night, as Jessica was sitting on the edge of their king-sized bed, tears rolling down her cheeks, Andrew towered over her and said words that would be etched in her memory. "You're so dramatic. Stop acting like you're the first woman to ever be pregnant. I have bigger problems to deal with." In that moment, Jessica felt a profound emptiness in her chest, a sense that she was losing Andrew, and there was nothing she could do about it. She could never have guessed that Selina's arrival was not just a random fling, but a well-constructed plan to manipulate Andrew, and eventually to bring him to his knees. As Jessica's belly grew, her sense of isolation grew with it. She tried to reach out to old college friends, but most were scattered across different states, busy with their own lives and families. Her parents lived hours away. Though they worried about her, she downplayed the problem during phone calls, not wanting to upset them or tarnish Andrew's reputation. At work, she found solace in helping her clients, but even there, she was exhausted, both emotionally and physically. She thought about confiding in one of the fellow counselors, but shame stopped her. Jessica felt that by admitting her husband was stepping out on her, something she now strongly suspected. Though Andrew hadn't outright admitted it, she would lose the last shred of dignity she had. Meanwhile, Andrew made no attempts to conceal his growing obsession with Selina. The staff at his firm whispered about it behind closed doors. Some felt pity for Jessica, while others believed she was an obstacle to Andrew's unstoppable climb. The affair became an open secret, one that Jessica was forced to grapple with each time she glanced at her phone, dreading the possibility of seeing a suspicious text message. She was drowning in heartbreak, and Andrew seemingly did not care. In truth, Selina was more than just a gold-digging mistress. She was a strategist of the highest order, with her own complicated past. She had grown up on the rough edges of society, watching her mother work 3 jobs and endure multiple abusive relationships. Selina vowed at a young age never to become a victim. She saw in Andrew a path to wealth, but she also saw a reflection of the darkness. She recognized in herself an unquenchable hunger for validation. Andrew's childhood might have taught him about empathy and humility, but Selina's background taught her that life was a battleground where only the cunning survived. In the early days of their affair, Selina carefully studied Andrew's business deals, gleaning which ones were most profitable and which new ventures he was considering. She also noted which of his assets were in his name alone, which were co-owned with Jessica, and where he might be most vulnerable. Selina was not planning a short-term fling. She was building a foundation for something far more calculated, an eventual takeover of Andrew's fortune. She never spelled this out, but each move was a step closer to making Andrew her puppet. Her ultimate aim was to ensure that he trusted her completely, so deeply that she could orchestrate his financial downfall when the time was right and walk away with the spoils. Still, she had to deal with the presence of Jessica. Though Selina thought Jessica was an annoying hindrance, part of her also felt a twisted empathy. She knew what it was like to be cast aside. Yet, she refused to let that empathy weaken her resolve. If Andrew's marriage imploded because of her, so be it. Selina's eyes were on the prize. However, Selina soon realized that Andrew wouldn't simply divorce Jessica overnight. He liked the image of a stable, married businessman. He enjoyed the moral high ground it gave him in negotiations. In some twisted way, he also liked having a wife waiting at home. It made him look respectable, no matter how rotten he might be behind closed doors. So Selina changed tactics. She began planting seeds, insisting that Jessica's mental health might be questionable. She hinted that pregnant women sometimes develop postpartum issues even before the baby is born. She suggested that Jessica's clinginess might be a sign of a deeper instability, anything to erode Andrew's sympathy for his wife. Though Andrew was already far gone, these hints provided him with justification for his neglect. In his mind, Jessica's pleas for love and support were not only inconvenient, but possibly pathological. Jessica felt Andrew slipping further away. His phone calls became shorter. He spent money extravagantly on clothes, dinners, and weekend getaways money. Jessica suspected was for Selena. One day she found receipts for a 5-star resort in the Bahamas in Andrew's desk. He never mentioned a business trip to the Bahamas. When she confronted him, he laughed, telling her it was a last-minute meeting with potential investors. It was a lie so obvious that Jessica nearly choked on her tears. Yet, she did not leave. She couldn't. She was heavily pregnant, financially dependent on Andrew, and still clinging to the remnants of love she had for the man she married. Sometimes, late at night, she prayed that the baby's arrival would reset everything. She imagined Andrew holding their child in his arms, his eyes filling with tears, and finally realizing what he had done to his wife. She pictured the redemption arc that so many couples experience when a child is born. But deep down, Jessica knew it was just a dream, one she had to hold on to keep going. What she didn't know was how Selena's plan would eventually unravel Andrew's empire and in the process, free Jessica from a life of silent suffering, albeit through devastation and heartbreak. Karma was on the march, and it would be merciless. As Jessica entered her 3rd trimester, her body ached and her emotional endurance wore thin. She struggled to keep up with her job responsibilities, often needing extra rest breaks. The director of the non-profit noticed her fatigue and gently urged her to consider going on maternity leave. Jessica resisted because her work was one of the few places she felt valued. At home, Andrew's indifference was almost palpable. Each time she tried to bring up their baby's future, a name, a crib, a birth plan, Andrew dismissed her. The final straw came at a public charity event organized by the non-profit. Jessica had been asked to give a speech about the importance of early mental health interventions for children in stressful home environments. It was something she believed in deeply. She invited Andrew, hoping that seeing her passion in action might spark the old admiration he once had for her. Also, it was a chance to publicly affirm that they were still a couple, despite the swirling rumors. Andrew arrived an hour late, accompanied by Selena, who had audaciously introduced herself as his business partner. Jessica was on the podium when she saw them enter. Her hands shook as she recognized Selena from photos she had secretly found online, pictures from Andrew's corporate events. The sight of them together in front of her colleagues and supporters felt like a slap in the face. The audience might not have known the backstory, but Jessica did. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she lost track of the speech. She recovered quickly, delivering her lines through sheer will. Her voice trembled when she mentioned the devastation children face when parents argue or separate, but she forced herself to continue. She stole a glance at Andrew, hoping for a shred of compassion on his face. Instead, he looked bored, scrolling on his phone while Selena stood beside him, scanning the crowd with a smug smile. After the speech ended, Jessica walked off the stage, tears threatening to spill. She caught Andrew by the arm. In a hushed tone, she implored him to at least show some respect for her and their child. Andrew smirked and said loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Don't make a scene, Jessica. It's not a good look for you or for me." Then he turned back to Selena, leading her toward the complimentary drinks table. That public humiliation gutted Jessica. She fled to the restroom, where she locked herself in a stall and cried silently. The baby fluttered inside her, as if sensing her anguish. After several minutes, she composed herself, splashed water on her face, and stepped out. Her co-workers gave her sympathetic looks, but no one dared to confront Andrew. He was a major donor to several charities, including their non-profit, and they feared jeopardizing funding. Jessica forced a polite smile and went through the rest of the event in a daze. That night, Andrew didn't even bother to come home. He texted Jessica, staying at the office. Don't wait up. She knew that was a lie. She knew he was with Selena. And for the first time, Jessica felt something snap inside her. It wasn't anger or jealousy alone. It was the realization that she was utterly alone in this marriage. The baby in her womb was the only thing tethering her to Andrew, and even that bond felt terrifyingly fragile. In bed, she stared at the ceiling, replaying the humiliation she had endured. She thought about leaving, but where would she go? She had some savings from her job, but it wasn't nearly enough to sustain her and a newborn for long. And her parents, while loving, did not have the means to support her fully. Plus, there was still a whisper of hope in her heart, the hope that Andrew might come around or that some cosmic justice would intercede. Yet, she had no idea how swiftly and violently that cosmic justice was poised to descend on Andrew's empire. With Andrew thoroughly ensnared, Selena began the next phase of her plan. Using her position as a financial consultant, she subtly guided Andrew into riskier and riskier ventures. She persuaded him that, to stay at the top of the competitive tech marketing landscape, he needed to diversify into real estate, cryptocurrency, and even speculative hedge funds. Andrew, craving the next big payoff, agreed eagerly, signing paperwork without reading the fine print, sometimes transferring large sums into accounts. Selena set up, trusting her entirely because, in his eyes, she was his ticket to stratospheric wealth. Selena also started orchestrating deals with Andrew's rivals, pretending to negotiate on Andrew's behalf, but actually funneling money into shell companies that she and her secret associates controlled. She ensured everything was well documented, but shielded from immediate detection. Andrew's arrogance was his downfall. He never considered that someone might be using him the way he used others. Eventually, Selena recognized the perfect moment to tighten the noose. She carefully leaked misinformation to Andrew about a grand one in a $1 million investment opportunity overseas, requiring a large, upfront capital injection. Andrew took the bait. Over a celebratory dinner in a penthouse suite, Selena mentioned the investment in hushed tones, describing how it was too good to share with just anyone. She emphasized that if Andrew wanted to jump on it, he had to move fast, liquidating certain assets and borrowing against future earnings. High risk, high reward. Blinded by greed and enthralled by Selena's allure, Andrew fell for it. He allocated millions toward the venture, even securing a hefty loan using his firm as collateral. Selena acted as the broker, forging documents that funneled the funds into her private channels. By the time the paperwork was finalized, Andrew's empire was teetering on the brink of a very steep cliff, though he remained blissfully unaware. During this time, Selena strategically disappeared for a few days, claiming she needed to visit family out of state for an emergency. In truth, she traveled abroad to confirm the final details with her partners in deception, ensuring that once the trap was sprung, Andrew would bear the brunt of the fallout both legally and financially. Returning triumphantly, she played the devoted mistress, gifting Andrew a watch worth tens of thousands of dollars. He wore it with pride, never suspecting that within weeks, his entire world would come crashing down. Andrew's downfall began with a single phone call. It came from one of his trusted bankers who sounded panicked. "Mr. Blackwood," the voice said, "we've just been informed that the investment you've poured millions into is not yielding returns. In fact, the project's directors have vanished. We're looking at a potential total loss of capital. This puts your loan in immediate jeopardy. We need clarification on your plan to address this shortfall." Andrew's heart pounded. He tried calling Selena, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Within the next 24 hours, more calls flooded in from business partners, investors, and even law enforcement investigators. The overseas venture was revealed to be a sham. Millions of dollars had been siphoned off into untraceable accounts. The legal ramifications threatened to topple Andrew's entire empire. Even the reputable marketing firm he had built from scratch was tied up in the collateral. Investors demanded answers. Employees panicked. Andrew couldn't dodge the press, who swarmed his office building, asking for a statement about the unfolding scandal. Desperate, he tried to find Selena, but she had cleaned out her office, leaving behind only a terse resignation letter. He scoured the city, called her family, hired private detectives, nothing. She was gone, and with her, the life savings he had entrusted to her schemes. While Andrew battled the crisis, Jessica watched it all unravel. She saw news segments condemning Andrew's poor financial judgment and featuring interviews with disgruntled clients. Though she had been mistreated by Andrew, she couldn't help feeling a pang of pity. Despite her sorrow and growing resentment, a small part of her remembered the boy who had lovingly flipped pancakes and saved every penny to buy her a modest engagement ring. Yet she also recognized the harsh truth. Andrew had brought this on himself. But Andrew was still in denial, cursing the winds of fate for betraying him. He was too proud to apologize to Jessica or ask for help. Instead, he locked himself away in his home office, refusing to eat or sleep. On the day he learned that the bank had frozen his accounts, he finally snapped. He threw a fit of rage, destroying the expensive decor that once symbolized his triumph. Jessica, heavily pregnant and worried, approached the locked door. Andrew opened it, his eyes bloodshot and brimming with desperation. "Jessica," he said, his voice trembling, "I need your help. I'm ruined." Then, in a moment that laid bare his delusional arrogance, he added, "Call your father and ask for a loan." Jessica stared at him, stunned. Her father was a retired electrician, living on a humble pension. The very suggestion was outrageous. But in Andrew's panic, he clung to any hope. She looked at him, almost not recognizing the man before her. This was no longer the domineering millionaire who brushed off her pregnancy. This was a broken man, undone by greed and betrayal. She calmly told him there was nothing her father could do. Andrew only mumbled incoherently, as if the reality was too painful to process. Over the next week, lawsuits piled up. The media relished the story of the once brash marketing mogul who had collapsed overnight. Public opinion turned vicious. Former associates and employees, once loyal to Andrew, distanced themselves to avoid being tainted by the scandal. Andrew's name became synonymous with greed and foolishness. Yet, he still had not hit rock bottom. That would come in a scene Jessica would never forget. In the midst of this chaos, Jessica went into labor. The baby arrived 3 weeks earlier than expected. Jessica had been under immense stress, and her body finally gave in. She was rushed to the hospital by a neighbor. Andrew was off meeting lawyers, trying to salvage any part of his empire. Jessica lay on the hospital bed, pain ravaging her body, tears staining her cheeks. She desperately wanted Andrew to be there for the birth of their child, despite everything. She called him repeatedly, but he didn't answer. By the time Andrew finally checked his phone and rushed to the hospital, the baby boy had already been born. Jessica was cradling him in her arms, exhausted and teary-eyed, but flooded with a love she never knew was possible. Andrew burst into the room, disheveled, clothes wrinkled, the shell of a once confident man. He froze at the sight of Jessica holding their son. Slowly, he walked over, eyes red with exhaustion. For a moment, there was a flicker of the old Andrew. He reached out to touch the tiny fingers, tears pooling in his own eyes. Jessica thought maybe this was the turning point, the moment he would return to the family he had forsaken. But then, Andrew's phone buzzed. He stepped away to answer it, and the moment was shattered. "Jessica, I have to go. The lawyers need me." he said, voice cracking. He didn't even meet her gaze as he left. Jessica sat in stunned silence. She looked down at her newborn son, and a single clear thought formed in her mind. We don't need him. Andrew was spiraling. Every day brought a new lawsuit or a fresh scandal. Repossession notices appeared in the mail. The mortgage on the lavish mansion was unpaid, and the bank threatened foreclosure. He had to let go of most of his staff. His once thriving firm was like a ghost town. Unable to accept responsibility for his predicament, Andrew grew resentful, snapping at Jessica whenever she tried to talk about practical matters like how they were going to provide for the baby. He dismissed her attempts to help, complaining that she didn't understand real business. But behind the scenes, Jessica quietly made her own plans. She took an unpaid leave from the non-profit to care for her newborn and began applying for part-time online counseling jobs. She reached out to her parents, who agreed to let her stay with them if it became necessary. She realized she had to protect herself and her son. Andrew's meltdown could no longer be her burden to carry. The final nail in Andrew's coffin came when the authorities uncovered documents implicating him in fraudulent transactions paperwork Selena had skillfully laid in his name. The media exploded with headlines labeling Andrew a scammer, business contacts severed ties. Andrew's last lifeline, the trust of any potential investor, disintegrated. He had no choice but to sell everything. The sports cars, the mansion, the antique furniture, his entire image of wealth. The day Jessica saw moving trucks hauling away their belongings, she felt an odd sense of relief. The man who once laughed at her pregnant pleas was now confronted by the karmic consequences of his every lie and betrayal. One cold, rainy afternoon, Jessica packed a small suitcase for herself and the baby. She walked into Andrew's home office, where he sat hunched over a stack of foreclosure notices. She told him she was leaving and taking their son with her. Andrew glanced up, hollow-eyed, and offered no protest. He seemed too numb to fight. She paused, waiting to see if he would say anything, an apology, a plea, an acknowledgement of how miserably he had failed them. But Andrew only mumbled about how his lawyers were incompetent, about how if Selena hadn't tricked him, everything would still be fine. Jessica inhaled sharply, forcing back a sob, and walked away. With the baby in her arms, she stepped out of the house that was no longer a home, stepping into the rain and into a future unknown. The next morning, Andrew called her repeatedly, leaving desperate voicemails, begging her to come back. He promised he would change, that he would be the husband and father they needed. But Jessica had heard it all before. She did not return. Instead, she sought legal counsel, eventually filing for divorce. There was little Andrew could fight for. His finances were in tatters, and any illusions he had of keeping the house or generous assets were shattered. Jessica's heart broke for the man Andrew had once been, but she could no longer sacrifice herself to save him. Her priority was her child, and she vowed to give him a stable, loving environment. Something Andrew was incapable of providing. While Andrew was drowning in debt and legal troubles, Selena was living comfortably under a different name in a tropical paradise. Through offshore accounts, she accessed the fortune she had swindled. In an almost poetic twist, she occasionally released damning evidence to the media, ensuring Andrew's reputation could never recover. It was her insurance policy, a way to keep him too busy and too humiliated to ever come after her. A few months later, a journalist managed to track Selena to an upscale resort. She offered no comment when confronted. She simply flashed a predatory smile and returned to her lavish suite, leaving the journalist to wonder how one woman could orchestrate such a downfall. In the span of a year, Andrew went from a millionaire mogul to a disgraced figure with no viable career prospects. The last of his properties were auctioned off to pay a fraction of his debts. He ended up in a small, rented apartment, which he could only afford thanks to a meager severance payout he got before the firm fully collapsed. Gone were the sycophants and party invitations. Gone was the flashy lifestyle. He tried to contact old friends for help, but they either ignored him or politely declined. His parents, disappointed and overwhelmed, distanced themselves too. Andrew's father had passed away a few years prior, and his mother was in a retirement home, barely able to cover her own expenses. She had no resources to help her son. Emotionally, Andrew was a wreck. The press periodically revisited his story as a cautionary tale, a man undone by his arrogance and an unscrupulous mistress. Jessica's lawyers served him divorce papers, and he realized that, aside from a broken reputation, he was about to lose any semblance of a family he had left. Karma had not merely tapped him on the shoulder, it had grabbed him by the throat. The man who had once laughed at his pregnant wife's pleas, who had dismissed her tears as mere drama, was now devoid of the wealth, power, and influence he had once used to elevate himself above everyone else. While Andrew languished in self-pity, Jessica found a modest but warm place to stay with the baby, thanks to the support of her parents. She eventually resumed her work as a counselor, juggling motherhood with part-time hours. Though life was not easy, money was tight, and single parenthood was exhausting, she discovered a wellspring of strength within herself. Jessica developed a community support group for new mothers experiencing emotional neglect from their partners. Drawing from her own experience, she provided a safe space for sharing stories and resources. Word spread, and donations trickled in, enabling her to expand the program. For once, Jessica felt she was living her true purpose, free from the suffocating demands of Andrew's empire. Their son, whom Jessica named Samuel, grew healthy and strong. Sometimes, Jessica felt pangs of guilt about denying Andrew the chance to be a father, but she reminded herself that Andrew had made his choices. She did, however, allow carefully supervised visits once Andrew had somewhat stabilized, ensuring that Samuel would know who his father was, but never at the cost of his own well-being. One morning, as Jessica was heading to a local store, she ran into Andrew. He looked drastically different, thinner, paler, with hunched shoulders. He was dressed in clothes that had clearly seen better days. The man who used to stride through life with an air of untouchable confidence now looked like he was drowning in regret. He asked if he could see Samuel. Jessica, with compassion in her eyes, said she would think about it. Then she gently placed a hand on his arm and asked, "Are you okay?" Andrew shook his head, tears forming. He admitted how sorry he was, how he had been blind and cruel. He confessed he missed Jessica and the life they had, but Jessica merely nodded, her face solemn. "I hope you find peace, Andrew," she said softly, before turning away. Andrew watched her go, the child's laughter echoing in his ears. It was a sound he had never truly earned the privilege to bask in, a stark reminder of what he had lost. As weeks turned into months, Andrew realized that laughter, the mocking, dismissive laughter he had once used to belittle, Jessica was now a distant memory. He woke up each day to the dull ache of regret, haunted by the image of Selena, who had played him like a fiddle, and by the memories of Jessica's tear-streaked face. He sometimes visited a local community center, where he attended support groups to manage his stress and depression. Ironically, the counselors there were trained in part by Jessica's non-profit. Andrew never admitted who he was, afraid they would judge him if they recognized his name from the tabloids. Yet, day by day, Andrew learned humility. He found a low-paying marketing job at a small startup, working under a boss half his age who had no idea of Andrew's past glories. He had to relearn everything: discipline, respect, empathy, the very lessons his parents once taught him. Perhaps it was too late to reclaim what he lost, but it was enough to survive. Selena's triumph over Andrew was as precise as it was ruthless. In the early days of their affair, she recognized something lethal in the man who once claimed to love Jessica an unguarded ego, hungry for validation at any cost. Knowing Andrew was adept at manipulation himself, she played the role of willing student, never revealing she was far more advanced in the art of deception. Day by day, she studied his moods, read his gestures, and absorbed every detail of his financial strategies. Though Andrew believed he was finding a partner in crime, a mirror of his unbridled ambition, he was actually placing his fate into the hands of a woman who found great satisfaction in mastering her own puppet. Armed with this knowledge, Selena orchestrated his downfall from within the fortress he'd built. First, she encouraged him to invest extravagantly in ventures that were high risk. She praised his bold vision and audaciously framed each new gamble as essential to staying ahead of the competition. Then, once Andrew was deeply committed and thoroughly convinced these deals were his own brilliant ideas, she siphoned the very funds she had pushed him to allocate. It was surprisingly simple. Because he had become addicted to her approval and the flattery she dispensed, Andrew rarely questioned her judgment. He signed documents she placed before him in a haze of self-satisfaction, trusting that she was just as devoted to their mutual success as he was. Gradually, Selena gathered the perfect portfolio of evidence pointing back to Andrew. She masterfully arranged deals so that the paperwork put him at the center of every questionable transaction, while she kept her own involvement hidden behind layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. When the final puzzle piece fell into place, she disappeared without fanfare, no goodbyes, no tearful confessions. A simple resignation note on her desk sealed Andrew's fate, leaving him to face lawsuits, interrogations, and the vicious spotlight of public scandal alone. Yet her victory wasn't merely a testament to her cunning. It also served as the unexpected catalyst for Jessica's freedom. In eroding Andrew's empire, Selena unintentionally dismantled the very chains holding Jessica in a toxic marriage. The lavish house of cards Andrew had built collapsed into dust, and with it, the illusions Jessica once clung to. Though Selena's motives were purely self-serving, her betrayal paved a path for Jessica to break free and seek a life of independence and dignity. Andrew's final realization that the woman he'd forsaken his wife for had used him as a stepping stone came too late. He was left with staggering debts, a shattered reputation, and the dull ache of knowing he had lost every precious thing he once possessed. The irony of it all weighed heavily on him. He had laughed at Jessica's tears, mocked her pregnancy fears, and chosen Selena's magnetic pull over his own family, only to be discarded by the very mistress he believed would make his dreams unstoppable. Indeed, the mistress destroyed him in the end, delivering a blow more devastating than any Andrew had ever imagined. This cautionary tale reminds us that the seeds of our actions bear fruit in ways we often cannot predict. Andrew's ruthless ambition, Jessica's quiet suffering, and Selena's cunning manipulation all intertwined to form a perfect storm of betrayal and heartbreak. In the end, those who laugh at the pleas of the vulnerable will inevitably face the consequences of their callousness. Jessica, liberated by catastrophe, forged a future rooted in empathy and strength. Andrew, undone by greed and betrayal, faced the hardest lesson of his life. And Selena, the catalyst of his downfall, served as the instrument of karma, a reminder that no empire built on it can stand forever. If you found value in this story of love, betrayal, and ultimate redemption, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more compelling tales that shed light on the power of human resilience.